right now we have the wild iris blooming. They come in different colors. They're like champagne colors and purple, and they're very inspiring. So you don't need a lot of fancy materials. It's basically 140-pound paper. Cold pressed paper would be better because if you have the hot pressed paper, then it's going to react differently. So that's what we're talking about. Also, the type of brushes that you're using, because if you're trying to get a delicate vein in there and then you use the wrong brush or a brush that holds too much water, it can just take off on you. You're going to hear me repeat this again in a minute. Or if you're doing it wet on dry, then it's going to be really stand out too much, and then the viewer's eye is only going to be drawn to that. So that's what we're trying to work with. This is the way I test my colors. I like to keep it very loose and simple. You can always make an organized chart, and I do have organized charts, but this is just very simple for me, and I can keep on going. And you will see how I handle those things. And I don't necessarily need a good reference photo. I don't need to know my subject really in depth because I'm always looking at shapes and shadows and I'm looking at the direction of the flow, whether it is a flower like this or if it's a different subject. And then this is also another a reference photo that I use in another painting here. And these particular images, this is actually before we had digital images, and this is a 4x6 photograph that I actually blew up, so it's very grainy and the shadows are really dark, so you can't see things. The advantage of something like this or something like this is that it gets you away from all those little details where you can easily get stuck. And then, unless you really want to paint super realistically, and that's fine, but then with that kind of painting, I think you lose a little bit of the charm. Working my way down through the pile. This would be in our 6-week course. And what I like about this is if you notice the shadows here and the shadows here, this has more transparency, meaning more water. This has a little bit more blue. And the idea for this and that is because I want this to pull forward and I want that to push back. Then when we look at these little veins up here, if we do all the veins on dry paper, that can be distracting. What we want is to have maybe, or what I want, it'll be up to you what you want, is I want a little bit of a blurred line, and then I come in like later wet on dry to get a bit more definition. We're going to practice that technique in a minute. And then also when it comes to these little dots, which you probably can't see very well, like right in there, like we can always do a little stippling, or you could do some other things, but I've got a really fun way that I think you're really going to enjoy. Okay. That gives you an idea. I wanted to maybe go darker here, but I decided to leave it alone because I thought that would be a bit more interesting, and I can always do that. And so this is a pile of all these different paintings of irises. And what ended up happening was I realized that I'm not really a person that enjoys working with a lot of cool colors. I end up starting it and then I end up stopping about halfway through because I emotionally get a little bummed. I like something that's a bit more uplifting, but these are going to be great pieces to experiment with. Now, the other thing you could do is like somebody asked, I want a composition or they needed a line drawing. We don't need a line drawing. What we're going to do is you can create any kind of shape, and that's going to be our petal. We're going to work with the water to color ratio in the palette and then applying it to the paper and controlling the veins. So as I was looking at all of these, why I thought this was interesting, this was an older painting of mine. It has a lot more blue in it. I don't love it, but I can always use it and experiment. So with your older paintings, keep them and you can completely transform them. So when I look at this, I have light and medium and dark. But if I wanted to give it more shape, I would work with more transitional values. And that's going to be something very similar to what we're doing today. This one here, we have the veins. Okay, if you can see how that expands, we want to control this because otherwise, if it's too dry, like I said, it stands out. And if we have too much water on the paper or too much water on our brush, then it dissolves too much. And how I could handle this is, of course, let it completely dry and then come in with a dry brush and just add a few light lines on top of this. And that visual of the line on top of this really blurred wet and wet area is actually going to catch the viewer and it'll stand out. So we have a lot of workarounds. So if you look at this, okay, over here and here, you can see this is wet on dry, so it stands out a lot. So if I have a whole painting of this, that's going to be a bit too chaotic. Now with this one, it's on 140-pound paper. You can see I stop because I'm not enjoying something like that. So with this, I felt it was too dark and I didn't like the purples in here. I thought it was too blue and my lines disappeared. So I just lost interest. I can always come back to it. But the 140-pound paper, you're going to have a painting that has a lot of, you can work on it. You can do just fine with the 140-pound paper. But in order to get that real power that you may want in your painting, that's when I would go to the 300. Now this is on a 300. We have a nice soft transition here and a soft transition here. Why is this important? Because that has to do with the amount of water on the surface. And that's what we're going to work with. Why I'm showing you this wild one is because it was a brand of paint that I usually love. And what happened was once it dried, it got brighter and I just didn't know what to do with it. So I haven't come back in. I haven't done anything with it. It just almost got a little too acidy to me. And before I make a big mess over here, let's talk about the paper. This is 140-pound Arches paper. These are wash brushes that I have. Usually, if I'm painting a large flower, I need a large, like movement with water, I will use my bamboo hake brush. Why I use this one over one with a wooden handle is because I like the length. The problem is it loses hair and it will lay down more of a puddle. I don't really need that right now. And then if I want less water, I will use a synthetic brush. The difference between the 140 and the 300 is the 140 I can do more realistic painting. It has a smoother surface, less tooth, it dries faster. But if I want something that it holds the water more on the surface and I can get that soft transition, I just about always go for the 300. Okay, so we have this. I have a little water container right here. I have a terry cloth towel here. And the reason why I have the terry cloth towel, I prefer this over a roll of toilet paper that a lot of people like to use or a roll of paper towels. I like to go here, remove the extra water, tap it on my towel. The brushes that I'm using here are a number 20, 14, and 8 blend brush. Now it depends on the type of painting that I'm doing. When I'm doing a floral, these are my go-to brushes. The other brand that I would use is a Winsor & Newton Scepter Gold series. Of course, there's other brushes. There's like the Escoda and other blend brushes, which are fine. The reason why I'm using those or the Winsor & Newton brand is because I'm looking for a particular control. If I use a natural brush, it's going to hold too much water and color. And then if I apply it to a flower and I'm using a brush that is a natural brush, I could easily have one big flooded mess with tons of blooms. So that is why. We're going to look at that in a second. The other thing I'll be using is a synthetic brush. Now the synthetic brushes will give me more control, hold less water and color. This is what I apply color with. And a natural brush holds the most amount of water. So basically what happens is with a blend brush or actually a synthetic brush, let's get more water in there. Well, this is funny. The paper is doing some weird thing here. So that is something that doesn't happen. So I don't know what it is. It could be in the sizing of the paper. So I don't want that. The sizing is what keeps the water and color on the surface. And let's see. Oh, this is just terrible. Let's look at that. I think this is actually very interesting. That is so weird. So if you notice, this isn't what usually happens. So I'm going to grab a different piece of paper. We all have to be flexible. Okay, and actually while I'm doing this, if you notice, I'm dipping my brush in the water, bringing it into the palette, and I'm thinking about the amount of water and color in the palette here. I love to blend my colors. It's also nice to mix your color on the paper too and allow them to mingle. So I want to test my paper here. Do you see how different this is? It ends up flowing a little better. So if you have a synthetic brush, it runs out of water and color very easily. If you have a blend brush, but you get a lot of control with it. Why this is important, it's going to work for the veins that we want. Then with a blend brush in general, it gives you the control and it has that water holding ability. Let's see if we can go a little further with it. It doesn't run out of water and color as quickly. You can see I have dry areas here, and this goes further. Okay, now this is a natural brush, and it's going to have a more water holding ability. And I can go much further with that. Do you see how I can keep on going? Why this is important. If I tried to do a painting of a flower with a synthetic brush, what happens is it's stiff, it's going to lift the previous layer, it won't lay down the color or water. This one is a good brush. The synthetic or the Sable Synthetic Blend is a good brush to have control over the water holding ability and where I want to place the color and the intensity of color. With the natural brush, it's going to lay down more water. So I'm going to have to pay more attention to how much water is on the brush. Let's flip this over. And that's going to matter when we do our veins. So let's look at maybe controlling the amount of water. Let's create a petal. Maybe something like that. Any kind of shape, basically wide here and taper it. Okay, you can make it wiggly. You can make it not so wiggly. It doesn't have to be that perfect. And I think I'll go ahead and make my line a little darker right there so you can see it. When I want to have that flow of color, I'm going to think of a different brush because I want to have that transitional color. Remember, we talked about something like this or this, something like that, and those veins. Then I want a brush that's going to hold the amount of water I need. I'm going to decide, do I want a synthetic brush or a bamboo hake brush? This is a big shape. I'm going to use this, or you could use a mop, something like that if you wanted to. I'm just going to fill this area in with water. Why I need more water, this is 140-pound cold pressed paper. It's going to dry faster. And then I'm going to decide what colors do I want. Now, in this thing today, we really don't need to worry about being perfect. So I'm going to take the colors that I already have in my palette. I think I'll take maybe a little purple or a little blue. I don't want it to be that bright magenta color. Okay, this is what you can do. You're going to take a big triangle or a big shape. It can even be a circle. It doesn't matter. Then we're going to put a little water and color in the palette. Notice how much water I have in my palette right here. It's pretty runny. Then I'm going to take a larger brush like a number 20 blend brush, and I'm going to scoop up my color. And to have control in those clean lines, I'm going to go right along the pencil line. I left the water right here, pencil line's right there. I'm going to go right along the pencil line, right like that. We don't want to make a halo, but I want control and I want it to be clean. So I'm going to go ahead right along that edge. If you noticed how I changed my brush like this, I'm touching the edge of the water and I can wiggle this. Okay, and then I'm just going to go along this line right here. If you notice this space, you see that line right there? That's because it didn't touch the water. If you look at this area down here, you can see the amount of water I have. Okay, I'm leaving this way for a minute because I'm going to show you how you can fix that. I want to take advantage of the amount of water on the surface. You can see how much water there is right there. So when I have a line like this that I don't necessarily want, then I'm going to come in with a number 30 natural hair brush like this, or a 20. I'm going to get it wet, remove the extra water. I don't want to wring it out. I just want less water. Then I'm going to touch the edge until it can allow that color along there to run out a little further. Okay, now everything should be kind of damp in that space. And then I'm going to go ahead and move this around. Now, if I go back and forth like this, I'm going to lose that highlight. And if you wanted, you could do that. But what's nice about this is we retain the highlight there, and that's going to help give our flower shape. Now for that extra water, I'm going to allow that to run down like this. I'm just doing that little puddle there, taking a natural brush and lifting that out and removing the extra water. Just like that. Now this doesn't have a lot of color. This is like a wet into wet surface. And I can come back in and apply more color. So let's say I'm going to do that. If I continue to add that amount of water on a natural brush and put color in here, all that color is going to accumulate along the edges and create a ring that we don't want. This is also drying pretty quickly. This is drier than that area, right through here. So I really should move a little quicker. What I want is more color intensity. So I'm going to grab my color, take a little bit of the water, go right up here. I'm getting the water. This is, just something to really practice. I'm going to put a little more color in this area. I'm going to scoop up that space right there. I'm just going to make a super little simple petal. And I think I'm going to go ahead and sweep this up a little bit. Notice how I'm holding the brush in the middle and I'm sweeping. Then I'm going to go ahead and lift it again and use the amount of water on the surface and move it around. It can be a little uncomfortable when you first start, so that's why I think this is important. I'm going to take this 30, remove the extra water. I don't like the shape of that. Then I'm going to soften. This has quite a bit of water there. I'm going to let that color accumulate down here again. And let's look at how wet this is. So there's a couple things that I'm thinking about right now. Is I think I would like to add a little yellow into this. And by adding the yellow into that area, can turn brown, which we don't want. But maybe it'll be a bit more neutral. I'm going to take a Hansa yellow or whatever yellow I have in the palette, and I'm not going to overmix it. I'm just going to go ahead and sweep that in. So I just laid it on top. I'm going to see how it settles. I think that actually looks all right. So I want that to start to dry. And remember, I'm paying attention to how I want to direct the flow. This is too wet to add veins to it right now. If you can see that, I need that to dull down. So I'm going to go to a synthetic brush. I'm going to have less water here because I want to practice my veins. Actually, I think I can just do the veins here. So I'm pressing a little harder and I'm not releasing as much water. Right. right. So for the veins, while this is drying, I'm going to think about what kind of brush do I want to use for that. And this is a blend brush. If I use a blend brush and I have too much water, it could continue to spread. Actually, I think that's kind of okay, but it is still spreading. Hopefully you can see that. And if I use the 8 or the 14, it's going to be too big. So I want to scale it down again to a number 8 or a 6 or a 3. And what I also want to do is not go here and stop. Otherwise, I'm going to get a little dot on the end. I want to taper it like that. And if we go wet on dry, you can see the difference. You really see that. Okay, so that is dulling down. So here I'm going to go ahead. Let's get a few veins in. I want to have a sweeping stroke. I'm paying attention to how wet that is. I don't want to go into this puddle. I'm going to take the color, put it on the side so it's a little drier, not as wet. This is still damp because it's going to continue to spread if I work with it, but I am right now. Okay, you can also press a little harder on your brush. Okay. And then we'll see what happens once that dries. And then we can always come back in and then go wet on dry. See how this is taken off? Even though it's very light, you can see how it spreads and it doesn't have any control. That's why we want to pay attention to the type of brush, like having a synthetic brush. So if we go in here and if we just do a whole painting with all of these lines, that's going to stand out so much and that's all you're going to see. Okay, so let's look at that to kind of that idea. I can go ahead and dry that and then add more veins on top of that. And since I'm moving pretty quickly, you know, I don't really have the control or the drying time that I would necessarily want. So we're just practicing. I'm going over those lines, just like that. I'm letting that dry for just a second. And what I can see, even with this here, you can see that little hair. I'm going to take a number 3 blend or synthetic brush, remove the extra water. And one thing I like to do is just fan this out like that. And then just try to lift that out. I'm not trying to release more water into this. Otherwise, it's going to create a little pool that I don't want. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and dry this. Now, this is not completely dry. It's still floppy. So if I wanted to really layer color on top of that, I would wait for that to be drier. But let's continue with those veins because they don't stand out too much. I mean, that's fine. But if I wanted them to stand out more, I could come back in, look at where they are. If I wanted them to be darker. Okay, so you would probably go a little slower than I am. That's a little wiggly down there, which I don't want. I'll remove the extra water and I'm going to soften. And the reason why I did this is I wanted to show you something else. Remember I said get an old crummy brush? What I was using was something like this. And what I wanted to do is a technique for all those spots. Like this one, I came in and I used my brush and I did that, but I didn't like that as much as that one with all those spots or that one. I want the surface to be dry, just like that. And I'm just going to do this. I love that so much better. Okay, that's just an old crummy brush. If I use a mop, it's going to lay down too much water. Let's look at the difference. Well, it actually can work. Look at that. That can work nicely too, but I don't want a lot of water on it. So practice with the different types of brushes that you have and see what you like. This has a different kind of pattern. I don't like that pattern either, but I liked that old brush. Let's go ahead and add some spots in here. Maybe rotate it so it's not all the same. You'll take more time than I am. Let's say I wanted to add more color into this. It's not ideal for me to do anything, but I'm going to do it. Remember, this is practicing. We're experimenting. I'm going to come in wet on dry, grab my color. I really should wait for that to be completely dry. Then I would take the 30 and I'm going to soften. The danger that I have here is that it isn't completely dry. It can easily lift the previous layer of color. I think these are a little too abrupt, so I'm going to fool around with that and lift some of the color out. Why we want to pull the water out further is so the color that's here is going to travel out to the water's edge. And if we don't go far enough, then it's going to have a very hard line. And I could always take more time, but I really do like that a lot.